The photograph was wedged inside a mislabeled evidence box, its edges soft with age but its image unnervingly sharp. At first glance, it looked ordinary enough, a family of 5 standing stiffly in front of a narrow house, their expressions frozen in the uncomfortable way people once posed for cameras. The sky above them was pale and empty, the kind of blankness that suggested the photo had been taken just before dusk, when shadows begin to stretch longer than they should. I almost put it back without a second thought, until something about the image made me pause. It was the eyes. 4 of the figures stared forward with the dull patience of the photograph dead, but the 5th, standing just behind the others, seemed different. The eyes were slightly unfocused, as if they hadn't stayed still when the shutter clicked. There was no blur anywhere else in the photo. Just the eyes, watching. Following. I turned the photograph over. No date. No names. Only a faint stamp from a precinct that had been closed since the 1970s. Curious, I searched the address listed in the old case file and felt a tightening in my chest when I found it. The house had burned down in 1968. Electrical fire, 5 fatalities, no survivors. The report was clear, final, unquestionable. Yet there they were, standing in front of it. As I looked closer, details began to surface that I was certain hadn't been there before. The windows of the house behind them were darker than the sky, swallowing light instead of reflecting it. The shadow beneath the family didn't align with their feet, stretching slightly to the left, as if cast by something standing just out of frame. My reflection trembled faintly across the photograph's surface, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I saw another shape beside me. That was when I noticed something else. In the lower corner of the photograph, barely visible beneath a crease, was a shape that didn't belong, an extra hand, pale and thin, resting on the edge of the image, as though someone had been standing closer to the camera than they should have been, waiting for their turn to be seen. The first turning point begins quietly, almost innocently, with the discovery of a photograph that was never meant to be found. It emerges from the depths of a neglected police archive, buried among outdated files and forgotten evidence, its presence unexplained and undocumented. At a glance, the photograph appears ordinary, even dull, depicting a family posed stiffly in front of a modest house. There is nothing dramatic about their clothing or posture, nothing that immediately signals danger or tragedy. This sense of normality is what makes the discovery so unsettling, because the image exists in direct contradiction to official records that insist the house, and everyone connected to it, were destroyed decades earlier. As the photograph is examined more closely, the weight of its impossibility begins to settle in. The house in the image is unmistakable, matching architectural details from old reports and maps that confirm it should not exist in any physical or visual form. According to the records, it was reduced to ash in a fire so complete that investigators found little more than a charred foundation. Yet the photograph presents the structure intact, solid, and standing, as if time itself had been momentarily reversed or deliberately ignored. This contradiction introduces the first fracture in reality, forcing the observer to question not just the photograph's origin, but the reliability of documented history itself. What deepens the unease is the condition of the photograph. It is aged, its edges worn and softened by years of handling, suggesting it has existed for a long time rather than being a modern fabrication. The paper smells faintly of dust and smoke, an almost imperceptible detail that evokes the fire described in the reports, blurring the line between artifact and aftermath. There are no labels, no timestamps, no identifying marks that might explain who took the photograph or why it was preserved while everything else connected to the house was lost. Its anonymity feels intentional, as though the image was meant to be hidden until the right moment. This turning point is crucial because it shifts the story from curiosity into dread. The photograph is not merely a strange object, it is evidence of something that should be impossible. It implies that the past is not as settled as it appears, that events believed to be concluded may still be echoing forward. The existence of the image suggests that the fire did not erase everything, that something survived long enough to be seen, recorded, and quietly stored away. From this moment onward, the story is no longer about uncovering forgotten history, but about confronting the possibility that the past has found a way to resurface, intact and watching, waiting for recognition, as if it had been preserved not by chance, but by design the second turning point unfolds when attention shifts from the photograph as a whole to a single, disturbing detail that refuses to be ignored. At first, it is difficult to pinpoint exactly what feels wrong, only that the image carries a quiet tension that grows the longer it is observed. The family's faces are stiff and emotionless in the way old photographs often are, frozen by long exposure times and social formality. Yet one figure disrupts this stillness. Standing slightly apart from the others, this person's eyes do not possess the same lifeless patience. Instead, they appear subtly blurred, as if they moved at the precise moment the camera captured the image. This blur should be impossible. Every other element in the photograph is sharply defined, from the creases in clothing to the rigid outline of the house behind them. Early cameras demanded complete stillness, making even minor movement visible across the entire frame. The fact that only the eyes are affected suggests intention rather than accident, as though the figure chose to move in the smallest way possible. The effect is unsettling, creating the illusion that the eyes are not fixed in the past like the rest of the image, but active, alert, and aware of the present observer. As the photograph is studied repeatedly, the sensation intensifies. No matter where it is placed or how it is angled, the blurred eyes seem to follow, maintaining a silent connection that feels deeply personal. This creates the disturbing impression that the figure is not simply captured by the camera, but is instead looking through it, using the photograph as a bridge. The longer the observer stares, the harder it becomes to shake the feeling of being seen in return, as though the image is slowly erasing the boundary between viewer and subject. This realization introduces a shift from historical mystery to psychological unease. The photograph is no longer just a record of a moment, it behaves like something alive, responsive, and selective. The blurred eye suggests awareness, implying that the figure understood the act of being photographed and reacted to it. This defies the expectation that the people in the image are unaware, passive subjects locked forever in a single instant. Instead, it raises the possibility that at least one of them retained agency beyond the moment of exposure. This turning point plants the first seed of fear that the photograph is not a closed artifact of the past. The movement in the eyes hints at continuity, at something unfinished and restless. It suggests that whatever was captured did not remain trapped within the image, but retained the ability to observe, recognize, and perhaps remember those who look upon it, transforming the photograph from evidence into a silent participant in the unfolding events. The third turning point arrives when official records are finally cross-checked against the photograph, transforming unease into outright horror. What began as a visual anomaly becomes a documented contradiction, grounded in facts that cannot be easily dismissed. Old fire reports, death certificates, and newspaper clippings are pulled from storage, each confirming the same grim conclusion. The house burned in the late 1960s, the fire spreading too quickly for escape, killing every known occupant inside. Names, ages, and causes of death are meticulously listed, leaving no room for ambiguity. According to every available source, no one survived that night. As each name is compared to the figures in the photograph, a disturbing alignment emerges. The parents match the records perfectly. The children's ages correspond. Even clothing descriptions from witness statements seem to echo the shapes and silhouettes captured in the image. The photograph is not symbolic or staged, it is specific, precise, and deeply connected to the documented tragedy. This realization strips away any lingering hope that the image might be unrelated or coincidental. It belongs to the fire, just as the victims do. Yet one discrepancy remains impossible to reconcile. The figure with the blurred eyes does not appear in any death record. Their name is absent from every report, missing from hospital logs, police summaries, and burial registries. It is as if this person existed only up until the moment the photograph was taken and then vanished from official history altogether. The silence surrounding them feels deliberate, not accidental, suggesting an omission rather than an oversight. Someone was present that night who was never accounted for, never acknowledged, never explained. This discovery reshapes the photograph's meaning entirely. It is no longer a static memorial to the dead, but evidence of something unresolved. If everyone in the house died, then the presence of an unrecorded figure implies either survival without trace or something far worse. The blurred eyes now take on a new significance, no longer merely unsettling but accusatory, as though the photograph is exposing a truth that records were meant to bury. The image becomes a witness contradicting authority, quietly insisting that the story told about that night is incomplete. The absence of this figure from history introduces a profound sense of imbalance. Death is meant to conclude, to close narratives cleanly, yet this omission leaves a loose end that refuses to be tied. It suggests that the fire did not consume everything, that someone or something slipped through the cracks of documentation and memory. From this moment forward, the fear is no longer abstract. It is anchored to the idea that one presence escaped both death and record, lingering somewhere between evidence and erasure, watching from a place where it was never meant to exist. The fourth turning point begins when the photograph stops behaving like a singular artifact and starts multiplying, turning investigation into obsession. What was once a lone, inexplicable image becomes the first in a series, each new version surfacing under circumstances that defy logic. The next photograph appears weeks later inside a file that had already been reviewed, identical in age, texture, and framing, yet undeniably different. The house remains the same, the family stands in the same rigid formation, but something has shifted in the margins, subtle enough to be missed at a glance, impossible to ignore once noticed. In this newer image, the space between the figures feels tighter, as though the air itself has compressed. Shadows are slightly longer, creeping toward the foreground. The figure with the blurred eyes stands closer to the camera than before, no longer partially hidden behind the others. Their face is clearer, but the eyes remain disturbed, caught in that same unnatural state of motion. The effect suggests progression, as if the photograph is not repeating itself but advancing, frame by frame, toward an unseen conclusion. Soon more versions appear. One is discovered in a digitized archive that had never contained physical photographs. Another arrives anonymously in the mail, folded carefully despite no return address. Each image is newer in sequence, yet still impossibly old in material. With every iteration, an additional presence begins to emerge. At first it is only a shape at the edge of the frame, a distortion where the light should be clean. Then it becomes unmistakable, another figure, standing just outside the family, closer to the camera than all the rest. The realization is terrifying in its implication. The photograph is not simply documenting a fixed moment in time, it is evolving. It reacts, updates, and incorporates. The added figure is not random either. Its posture mirrors that of the observer, its angle aligned as if it has stepped into the image from the viewer's position. The boundary between watcher and subject begins to erode, replaced by the growing sense that the photograph is selecting its next participant. As the images accumulate, so does the pressure. Sleep becomes shallow, interrupted by the certainty of being observed. Reflections in glass and dark screens feel briefly out of sync, as though something is adjusting its position just behind the viewer. The photograph now feels less like an object and more like a process, one that draws closer with each iteration. The most recent image leaves almost no empty space between the figures and the edge of the frame, as if there is room for only one more presence, waiting to step fully into view. The fifth turning point arrives not with a discovery, but with an understanding that settles in slowly and refuses to leave. After studying the sequence of photographs, the pattern becomes impossible to deny. Each new image does not merely repeat the past but rearranges it, subtly reshaping the composition to accommodate something new. The house remains unchanged, frozen in its unburned state, while the figures inch forward, closer to the camera, closer to the present. Time in the photographs does not move backward or forward in a conventional sense, it folds inward, drawing everything toward a single inevitable moment. What becomes clear is that the photograph is not recording history at all. It is rehearsing it. The early images show only the original family, standing at a distance, unaware. Later versions introduce the blurred-eyed figure, then the additional shapes at the edge of the frame, each one positioned closer than the last. The progression mirrors anticipation rather than memory, as if the image is preparing space for events that have not yet occurred. The fire, the deaths, the erasure from records were not the conclusion, but the starting point of something ongoing. The most disturbing realization is the role of the observer. The extra figure that appears in the later photographs aligns too precisely to be coincidence. Its height, stance, and placement correspond to where the viewer would be standing while holding the image. The photograph does not simply show who was there, it predicts who will be. By studying it, comparing versions, and acknowledging its changes, the observer has unknowingly participated in its evolution. Attention itself has become the mechanism through which the image completes its sequence. This reframes the photograph as a threshold rather than an object. It is a boundary where the past waits for the future to arrive. The figures are not trapped inside it, they are making room. The blurred eyes are no longer watching out of curiosity or malice, but expectation, fixed on the moment when the final position is filled. The fire that supposedly ended everything now feels like a doorway, a necessary rupture that allowed the photograph to exist outside normal time. The final image offers no spectacle, no dramatic transformation. It simply feels finished. The composition is full, balanced, complete. There is no longer a sense of being watched, because the watching has ended. What remains is the quiet certainty that the photograph no longer needs an observer, having successfully documented what was always meant to happen, sealing the moment where the future finally stepped into the past.